I want to announce two things quickly, one of which is Wednesday at 2. There's a Wednesday episode, panel discussion and conversation with 3 new faculty members, Kelly Bear, Paul Anderson, and Luis Ortega. And then Friday evening will be our big party portfolio day event, Friday evening. Tonight, we are very pleased to welcome Marlon Blackwell to UIC for the first time. Educated at Auburn and Syracuse, Marlon practices in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where he also serves as distinguished professor and department head in the School of Architecture at the University of Arkansas. In addition to teaching at Arkansas for the last 20 years, Marlon has also recently held named visiting professorships at most recently the University of Virginia, where he was the Thomas Jefferson professor, which sounds very important. At the University of Michigan, where he was like the ceremony professor. You're like everybody's famous professorship. University of Florida, Auburn, and Washington University. In 2005, his monograph in Architecture of the Ozarks was published by Princeton Press, and a year later he was named by ID Magazine as one of the undersung heroes of design. Last year, his St. Nicholas Church won the Civic and Community Building category of the World Architecture Festival in Barcelona, and this year he received an AIA National Honor Award for the IMA Ruth Lilly Visitors Pavilion in Indianapolis, Indiana. His work has been published in numerous magazines and collections, including Architect, A+U, Detail, Dwell, Met Home, the Fame Atlas, and Architectural Record, including, as I'm sure many of you saw, the recent November cover of Record, which was for Marlon's St. Nicholas Church. Most of Marlon's built work is in and around the Fayetteville, Bentonville area, which, if you don't know, is the land otherwise of Walmart and Frank Perdue chickens, and very interesting context to work in. And I imagine that future generations of historians and students of architecture will go see this collection of Marlon's projects down there and understand them really as the Palladio of the Ozarks, or maybe better, the Aldo Rossi of the Ozarks, with his almost surreal combination of vernacular structures with super abstract architectural images and figures. When you drive around Fayetteville, you start to see these peculiar characters that look both alien, but also somehow strangely familiar or at home in the landscape, and realize that they're this product of a single hand and vision, Marlon's. I think as some of us here, Marlon in particular, across the work seems motivated by strong figural profiles and sections. The same that way is also a fellow traveler of John Haydick, as well as maybe an American version of Neumann's Riddick. And given this interest, it's probably not surprising that he credits some of his work to an early childhood interest in drawing comic strips. In particular, his interest maybe in billboards and ducks at the same time. Besides being talented and interesting, Marlon is really one of the nicest people you will ever meet in architecture. For many of you, that doesn't suggest a very high bar, I know. But just imagine that Marlon is way above the next person. And I think that his projects in general embody that kind of spirit of generosity and optimism and humor. One thing that we're interested in at this school is how work can cut across predefined constituencies to generate unlikely audiences for projects. In other words, how do you put something into the world that people who have nothing in common can still find an identity and resonance with? And I think this is true of Marlon's work. I will give a minor piece of evidence of this, which is I would have thought there is nothing in architecture that Juan Palasama and I could agree on. At least I was hoping that was the case. But we're both fans of Marlon's work. Admittedly, Palasama is wrong. But I was wrong. So rather than welcoming Marlon to UIC, which is what we usually do, I hope we can make him feel as uncomfortable as the strange bedfellow's reception of his work makes me feel. Marlon, great to have you.
Thanks, Bob. That's a better introduction than I've got, so I might just dive in. I'll go back to my patent introduction. But anyways, it's great to be here. I've been looking forward to coming to Chicago to give a talk for some time. I've lectured just about every place, but never in the Chicago area. I have to say this is the toughest architectural building I've ever been in. I think there isn't anything you could do to this building that you couldn't handle. So it's part of the, I think, expressive character of the place and of the school. Having been introduced to some of what's going on in the school and so forth, you guys are a perfect fit. You guys are tough on like that. And kind of funny too, although I never knew humor was spelled H-U-M-E-R. I know there's got to be some kind of existential overlay there. I read that in the Clumsy Forms publication. Hopefully I'll be enlightened later. That's not a misspelling, but actually a wonderful take on the word. You know, as Bob was saying, I do live, practice, teach, and build in Northwest Arkansas, which is the home of the Ozark Mountains and Walmart. It's Tyson Chickens, not Purdue. That gets you in trouble there. It's the land of Bill and a billion chickens, indeed. Right here, that's our state bird. And I really quite love the chicken industry there because in many ways it borders our landscape. We have hundreds of these 200-foot long chicken houses that are always oriented east-west. So if you're in the landscape, you know where you are. They're oriented east-west because to minimize sun exposure to the chickens. And of course, they don't want the chickens to cook before their time. So that farmers have figured that out. It's a good common sense way of dealing with water. And of course, they light up at night, and so it's like driving through a whole fantasy wonderland, homeless to get inflated in the evening. So kind of a wonderfully strange place. I think that word will come up quite a bit in the talk here. You know, it's in many ways considered to be in the middle of nowhere, but close to everywhere. Because of Walmart, we have more direct flights to major cities than any other city our size in the country. So if you get on a plane, we have New York to LaGuardia, directly to Chicago, to LA, Houston, you name it. So it's pretty interesting. It's a place that I was asked by Princeton Press to kind of provide an iconic image of when we were doing the book. And we think of the Ozarks as intersections of hills and valleys. Fayetteville is the only town in Northwest Arkansas that's actually built on hills. It's, you know, you squint and you have a lot to drink. It looks like an Italian hill town. If you notice on the top of the hill there, you can see sort of a shadow outline, a profile, how appropriate. Here, this is Old Main, the oldest building on our campus. And of course, in the valley is agriculture. So you can actually stand on the hills of downtown and see cows, chicken houses, and things of the country. It's kind of where the culture and agriculture come together. So we found this condition of the cow, the newborn calf, and we thought this was great. This is iconic. Just as we took the photo, a Walmart truck drives right through the middle of it. We thought, yeah, we forgot about commerce too. So it all comes together here. It's a place of real natural beauty, and it's also a place of real constructed ugliness. And, you know, it's a one that can be considered aesthetically and culturally impoverished. And words like abandonment, exploitation, nostalgia, erasure, they're all aspects of this place. And in many ways are conditions, I think, that are authentic as its natural beauty and local form. And one of the things I realize is that the land, the rural, urban, and suburban constructs that are here, that I live in, they're no more real than each other. So this is a land of disparate conditions, and it's not just a setting for our work, but it's really become part of our work. And in these conditions, I don't see a negative, but in fact a source of deep possibilities and direct experience with the world. So what we've done for the last 20 years have chosen to stay here and work in what we like to call the Ozark Outback. And what we've begun to do is turn over the belly turn over the rock, and discover the underbelly of our place. The visceral presences and expressive character that informs and sustains our efforts there. Now, I'm working from a conviction that architecture is larger than the subject of architecture. What we're trying to do is look at the world with a wide-angle microscopic lens as a way to generate ideas and actions from concrete experiences of our place, of the everyday, between the ordinary and the extraordinary, between one's own personal history and the history of our discipline. If you notice the building on the left, you've probably seen that. That's E. Fay Jones, AIA Gold Medal winner, practiced in Fayetteville for 50 years. His masterpiece, Thorn Crown Chapel, which is in Eureka Springs, about an hour from Fayetteville. Whenever we have guests, lecture series, or visiting professors, we take them here. And we've had everybody from Herzog and Huron, Zugzor, Robert Irwin, Leapskin, whoever we bring here. And the reality is that they just really engage with this particular masterpiece. It's quite fantastic. Now, about a mile and a half away, we have another kind of construction, which we like to call Milk Carton Jesus. And this is a place that's part of a passion play where tourists come and actors act out the story of Christ with a image of Jerusalem built. It's about 3/4 of an inch thick. It's all plywood. But then they have this wonderful statue of Jesus. It used to be a lot taller. It had been designed to be actually much taller. But the problem was he was going to have a blue flashing light on his head because of the FAA regulations. So that was just not acceptable. So what they decided to do, rather than redesign it, is just cut him off at the knees and push him down. And thus we have the proportions of the milk carton. We call him milk carton Jesus. Well, anyways, this is where we operate. We operate between the low and high culture. Again, we're not trying to resolve one to the other, but in fact, trying to develop resonance between these conditions. And it's through careful observations of micro and macro conditions, those that are biological, geological, and of course always cultural, allows to form the basis for an inductive bottom-up process that in effect allows us to amplify the small things that manifest the large things. And I think in that way of thinking, we can say, in the words of the great poet William Carlos Williams, that there are no ideas but things. And I believe as architects, certainly working in the 21st century, it helps us confront a couple of very critical questions, ones that are ongoing, I know, for us in our practice, and I'm sure that as students and practitioners, you have to deal with as well. The first question is, how do we embrace the world without being consumed by it? And the second is, how do we enrich and dignify the experience of being in the world for those who engage our work? And I think Da Vinci said it quite well, spoke directly about this, making from the experience of things, when he said it should not be so hard for you to stop sometimes and look into the stains of walls or ashes of a fire or clouds or mud or light places in which you may find really marvelous ideas. And I think, in many ways, that's all we're trying to do, is out of the muck of our own condition, is to try and find some really marvelous ideas. Now, I think it's safe to say that most architecture isn't very good. And most good architecture is good enough for most days. But some buildings, some architecture should rise above the everyday, or rise above its place. And I think this necessarily challenges us to return to the significance of the everyday and to enrich it and revalidate it through the totality of the things we make. And so what we find ourselves doing is choosing to work to build between the everyday. Here, the inadvertent meets the purposeful. The relationship is at once familiar and yet strange. We're, in fact, I think, involved in the task of recreating strangeness as a way to revive and intensify our experience of form and place. And this may become in our relationship with natural conditions as well as those of much more cultural situations. In either case, we see it as more of a transmutation than a transformation of place, where we're altering a particular place into another, but maintaining and intensifying the presence of what is found and what is given there. So I'm going to, as much as we look at nature made, we also look at ways to craft the strange and familiar, ways of operating on the place and the world as we find it, and asking the question, how might it be otherwise? So in effect, our work tries to defamiliarize our relationship to place. We take a more transgressive position that provides specificity drawn from a local situation. And we think this allows for more virulent permutations of type and typology, which we're very interested in, and that is resistant to the commodification of vernacular that's, I think, evident in most commercial development. And this idea of type is really fundamental to our work. It's fluid, it's dynamic, it's evolutionary, and it's adaptable to other types. And this idea of recreating strangers comes through the mixing and hybridization of the vernacular. I like to call it a secular vernacular, spiritual but not religious, in effect, in terms of what we're trying to do. But it takes on the typological and the natural, and involves really a method of architectural husbandry to arrive at that right mix in the right place at the right time. So let's dive in. A few things I want to share with you, and of course, those places between I was talking about, the motivations, often happen between the ideal and the more improvised in the discipline. Of course, for us, the ideal often comes in the form of the natural world and how our relationship exists between that and what we make. We've begun to look at our own body of work and how that becomes to evolve as a kind of progenitors and progeny from things like shotgun types and the villa and trailers and barns and bridges, and begins to develop a type of series of permutations and transmutations, again, both natural and more cultural, and then begins to develop into a project in which we're semi-conscious of and varies in each situation given the different constraints and sensibilities that we engage in a particular place. But these activities, these kind of mixing, provides, again, for a dynamic and adaptable way of dealing with type, which I think frees us in some ways and gets us away from the mummified version of typology, which eventually, I think, just gets reduced down to style. So the first project I want to share with you is a project we did for Architecture for Humanity. It's part of the Biloxi Model Home Program, post-Katrina housing. Biloxi is noted in the Gulf Coast of Mississippi as the only town that rejected the new urban scheme for the Gulf Coast. They decided that not everybody wanted to live in grandma's house with a drain on the porch. They were looking for other ways that one could deal with the new FEMA regulations, which stated that every new structure in the inner city has to be at least 9 to 12 feet above the ground level to deal with a category 4 or 5 storm surge, as well as winds. And so we wanted to take this on both as a response to these new regulations, but also recognizing that there is a social typology there, the porch, which in the South, of course, is that interface between the private world and the public world, where people hang out, gather, socialize. And so the implications of raising everything up in the urban condition, 9, 10, in this case 11 feet above the ground, creates a more potential residual condition. So we're trying to think of how we could rethink that in some ways. This is much of what we found when we got there, kind of a compilation of things. We worked a lot with photographer Tim Hersley. We came down and did a beautiful kind of poetic essay of the damage and destruction that was there when we came to town. And it really was quite poignant, but at the same time quite horrific as to what the storm had done. So, as part of the model home program, there were 7 families that were qualified. This is supported by the Angel Network and Autodesk, one for the Foundation, Oprah and AutoCAD getting together. And each family had to have their own property, their own land, and even some money, and then they picked the design. So there were 15 architects, 30 designs, and it was all public. And the family picked their own. Our family was a single man with 3 children. He was Richard Tyler. This is his house you see on the left. It had been totally destroyed. A church across the street had come off its foundations, and the surge had slammed into his house. He was quite irritated by that because he didn't go to church there. They held services there for 2 weeks before he asked them to leave. But he had to start over. It had been torn down on the corners of the FEMA trailer here, and the location of his house in Biloxi. Some of the projects down below. What we didn't want to do is another bungalow on stilts with pilings every 8 foot. So we really saw this as an opportunity to staff the program, make a more concise footprint, porch, a storage room that acts as ballast and anchor for the structure, and then a place to park the car. Very concise, and then a way of getting up into the house. It's all made out of a box rib, metal sleeve that's very weather resistant to storms. Simple planning of the service on the bottom, your living area on the 2nd floor, and then the 3rd floor is your private spaces. One of the things that happened in Biloxi and other places in the Gulf Coast is looting. So in the next door, we wanted to kind of think about that more seriously. So we put operable shutters at the east and west elevations that can be locked down from inside. In case of a storm, they can leave and secure their place and don't have to tape windows like you normally do. But it also acts as sun shading on a day-to-day basis for the east and west side. The back porch, you have your ground level porch and the upper level porch. The typology of the shotgun, which we started with, it's a series of permutations to arrive at ours. This is a wonderful Trina cottage, envisions great speculation by the urbanists, but an impoverished sort of idea. In construction, we noticed that the FEMA water line would be up here, so this will not be in the next storm. Again, being able to adapt, I think that's key to typological conditions. So the structure, which is part wood, part steel, but all hurricane resistant, mat foundations. Stairway is completely perforated and open, so as the water rises, it releases pressure rather than pushing the water up into the house. So just very simple, straightforward things. And we had to do this for $132 a square foot, so it had to be in a market rate and we can afford it. It's a 1,500 square foot house. Now, the building I showed you is really, it comes out of a bucket of ideas that were formed very early on in the practice. And the first build permutation of these ideas of mixing the natural with the more industrial is in the form of the Keenan Tower House, which is a 7-story house where we grounded it through developing an analog with the strided bark of the white oak and hickory trees that surrounded it. We milled this wood locally and belted it and made a kind of beautiful screen marks the mature height of the trees, but also creates a filtering light in the stair courtlet that spirals up through the building, using very specific sort of tectonic systems of layering and connections, superstructure, substructure, finish, local materials, creekstone, riverstone, crushed pecan shells from southern Arkansas makes up the floor. So when you step inside, you actually sink into the floor a little bit, acoustical change, signifying kind of transition from from the exterior to a place that was neither interior or exterior. But once you get above the trees, there's a whole other order in the land. It's basically, the landscape is punctuated by industrial and agricultural buildings like this feed mill by Tyson chickens, and they're all detailed in the same way. That's the other thing, they're all white. They're all detailed in metal panels or in concrete panels. So we wanted to take part of that other order, and of course you can see this from miles around. It's right in the 57 acres, right in the middle of Fayetteville. And we're able to develop the metal skin as a type of husk that slips over the wood, using purlins as substructure that are carefully ordered because they make up the interior finish of the building, at least in the outer part, in the inside, before we get into the conditioned spaces. Nice view you get at the top, a 360-degree view. The space is conceived in a Miesian way, and what I mean by that is the floor and the ceiling are reciprocal. So the distance from your eye to the floor and the eye to the ceiling are the same, so it creates a very intense perception of the horizon that kind of moves up and down where you move. A stair falls out of the ceiling, and then you're presented with this, what we like to call a sky court. It's a space with controlled views to the horizon, but the major view is open to the sky. At the equinox, you're able to sit there. This is the east elevation, due east. This is due west. You sit, the moon rises and the sun sets, and they're both in the same place in the sky, and you're sitting between them. It's pretty fantastic. So it's a great place for cosmological reasons, but also to sit or to sleep and eat. So again, these kinds of formal manipulations and this interest in the intersection of the natural and the industrial, the cultural, really begin to forming a kind of expressive character. This is a $40,000 project done back in '98 for a beekeeper. This is the first house client that I had. Was an old girlfriend's mother. So as students, I tell you, if you ever get dumped and somebody asks you to be their friend, at least consider the possibilities. I got my first house out of that, and then 2 years later she became a beekeeper. We came back, she needed a place to extract the honey. This is in North Carolina, in the mountains. Extract the honey from the comb, put it in a centrifuge, and then bottle it for sale at the market or along the road for sour honey. And we had a real challenge of coming back to this plan of the old house. Let me see if I have a picture. No, I don't have a picture. But this old house, had a 100-foot long concrete, 20-foot high concrete block wall pinned to a granite ridge at the edge of the valley. The hill dropped drastically. So this formal datum between the man-made habitat and the wilderness, we developed kind of a relationship with this by replacing the small structure in such a way that we're detaching it from the earth so that it didn't interrupt the drainage, the water flow on the site, and keep vermin out. But we put all our effort into this one architectural element, another type of datum, formal datum, a load-bearing wall made of quarter-inch steel plate and folded angled glass. And essentially, rather than a monolithic wall, a wall made of voids. And this acts as a display for the honey, storage for the honey. It also has a brise-soleil, and again, a load-bearing condition. So it nestles into its site. It has a carport where you can park a car. That's the secondary structure. So again, the canopy, a floor structure with no floor, and then the insertion of this very vacuum box, all made up out of steel plate and tongue-grooved wood. Again, the analog here is looking at the relationship that's been built over thousands of years between the beekeeper and the bee. It's exemplified by these Cartesian frames that are inserted in a bee box, a beekeeper's box, that act as a place for the brood chamber as well as the storage of honey. It delimits the activity of the bees, but it doesn't change the way a bee is genetically programmed to behave. So as you can see, there's two systems at work here, which kind of set up the way in which we begin to order this wall as a series of cells, Cartesian cells with a folded prismatic glass in between, which the honey is then stored. And then because of the refraction of light, it creates multiple reflections and conditions of opacity, translucency, and transparency, depending on where you are in relationship to it and what time of year that is. As I said, the cost of the project is about what you pay for a SUV these days. We were able to control the cost and the quality by prefabricating everything in Fayetteville and then shipping it out to North Carolina. One of the things I learned 10 years before when I was doing the house is that it's hard to keep contractors on the site in the mountains because they have all of these seasons. They've got the deer season, and turkey season, dating season, squirrel season, and other season. So we fabricated everything there, we shipped it out, and we erected the structure on foundations we already had done there in 3 weeks. So very kind of our first stab at prefab. Again, I'm only going to show you two projects that are in the monograph, this tower and this one, just to give you some indication that we're working on a project. We're stumbling, we're groping in the dark, but just trying to ask questions and getting from conceptualization to realization that help bring some coherence to what we're doing. So I want to share with you this most recent project in Indianapolis. It's at the 100 Acres Art and Nature Park, the Indianapolis Museum of Art. This is a bittersweet project that's had a much larger scope. Was working with our landscape architect, Ed Blake, of the Landscape Studio in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and environmental artist Mary Miss, out of New York, and Guy Nordson, a very good structural engineer we collaborated with. This is a place that's a fairly wild and volatile place between land and water. It's located right on the edge of downtown in Indianapolis, right in an oxbow of the White River here. The Super Bowl is going to be right there, so I'll just give you some indication. And then, a whole 19th century or early 20th century way of planning land. Now, there's also a canal that runs through Indianapolis, so that effectively cuts off the museum, this Edward Larrabee Barnes Museum, 60s. It cuts the museum off from the 100 Acre Art and Nature Park and essentially makes an island. In the middle of this oxbow is a lake, which used to be a pasture, but then became a quarry back in the 50s, 60s for digging limestone to make the interstate that goes through Indianapolis, which eventually filled up with water and is now a recreational spot in the city. Their idea was to begin to place site-specific artwork that you could experience as part of the nature walks, have nature journey paths, pathway journeys, and really have one of those, an art park right in the middle of the city, which is unusual. The kind of art that went there, what we were thinking and what this museum was thinking was two different things. Some of the art is interesting, some of it is not, in my view, but nonetheless, our task was to design an experiential center and an interpretive center in the park to act as extended thresholds and destinations in the park, not as a main point, but just as part of many destinations. The financial plug got pulled on this project back in 2008, but what they decided to go ahead with it was development of most of the park and one structure that would be a small site, as you'd like to see, in the 100 acres. So here's the 100 acres. Take away the lake, we have 61 acres of land. But when you factor in FEMA, flood easements, the floodway, the flood zone, sewer easements, you have 0.67 acres to build on. So very easy to find our site, which was either this refuse mound that had been taken over by cottonwoods here, or this little triangular piece of woodland in the floodplain surrounding. So we chose this little triangular piece where we would insert our small interpretive visitor center, which is really understood to be a kind of respite in the woods. This is what you continue with. This is the river, which they've had 3 100-year floods in the last 6 years. That's because of indiscriminate development upriver. So the river actually rises higher than the lake and then reaches into the lake. They hired Peter Eisenman to come up with an artful way of showcasing when this happens. He was also a victim of that pulling of the plug. So this is all this erosion, this craziness. This is the park, some of the different settings, installation by Team A out of New York, beautiful plaza by the lake, right here on the lake. The water tends to want to come here into the lake, also pushes here, bounces off this exit loop back into here, creates a wetland, and then reaches back again right through here. So very volatile. Pathway journeys, and then our project as an extension of those journeys sets up the limits. This is our site, wet, fecund, as we found it, underwater. So we really had to think about how we elevated the project. It had to be 5 feet out of the forest floor. So we had to really rethink the building and how it met the ground. Couldn't just be a 5-foot still. It had to be right at eye level. So we came up with another strategy. Ed Blake came up with these figured mounds that kind of redirected your view back through the woods, but also moved the building out of the floodplain, and the building could rest atop these mounds and just sit just above them about a foot. So you create a joint between the mounds and the building. One of the things that we're really after was not so much an object in the landscape, but something that would be revealed to you, discovered, in the way that a forest is revealed as you move through it. There is a kind of nearness that you need to have with that to experience it in a meaningful way. So we use the deer, as you see on the left, all 5 of those deer that you see on the right are in that picture on the left. So we're thinking of something more stealth, something that acts as somewhat as camouflage initially, but then reveals itself to you. So this is the project set in the woods. And looking again at this idea of pavilion, the notion of a light structure, the butterfly that has a root to feed on, and then looking at leaves, things that we found on the site, eaten away by insects, that have a condition of porosity. And we just started asking questions: what would happen if you had one material, one detail that you could fold around to make its own sort of canopy, and what if you allowed all the water and the light to pour through the building? So it was a place to start, not necessarily the end, but it had to have a really tough structure, an exoskeleton, in fact, for that to work. So this was what we worked with Guion, and this wonderful tons of moment sections, connections and intersections of steel, and then to develop a surface that could seamlessly fold and allow for the presence of the steel without ever seeing it imprinted through the structure. So we do a lot of really complex animations in my firm. Excuse me. So the idea of one surface folded is exemplified here. Thank you. So that's it. I'll do it reverse. There we go. And so one surface folds vertically and back horizontally, and then the program is sandwiched between, kind of tortilla like thing. And this is the lounge here, highly polished lounge, and then this bar here is the service area, the bathrooms, bar, kitchenette. So this becomes the structure, and so all of that is lined with 2x4 E-pay that's turned on its edge with spacing between. We had to overcome the codes in order to walk on this surface. So we developed a series of mock-ups that showed that we could take inch-wide by 2-inch deep acrylic bars that could be UV rated and make a composite beam out of each 2x4 drilled in with stainless steel screws and allows for expansion as well. And that allows the structure to seamlessly turn vertical and then go horizontal again. Of course, the acrylic drops out once it goes vertical and horizontal so that light water can come through it. And at night, of course, that's lit for water. So again, very simple plan, kind of enlargement of that figured plan. It's all ADA accessible, so to get up onto the ramps, these are 1 to 21 ramps. So we don't have to have rails and all that good stuff. So, whatever we do to minimize it as a building. The mounds are carved out underneath the building to allow, again, to reduce pressure and allow water to flow between during the flood. The black box you see is all charred cedar. It's a fire retardant wood, but also sets up a kind of condition of abstraction. While the building will turn silver over time, this will remain the dark black umber. Exoskeleton with the canopy. The benches below are blocks of Indiana limestone that have been carved part of the landscape. Tectonic diagram shows the many different layers that are all exemplified or demonstrated through the effects as light moves through the shadow play really starts to bring about kind of understanding of the effect of those layers. And we also spent time thinking about how you make oculuses through this system. So rather than just punching a hole, we looked at ways that we could actually complete it by changing the spacing incrementally. We studied that in a lot of ways. And then what I'm going to show you next is just a simulation, but when it rains heavily, it actually rains in this void, parallelogram void. So when I was told when they were building this, the workers would just stop and see this kind of phenomenon of shaping of rain. I've never seen it, and I've never been there when it rains, but we've tried to imagine what it might look like. I guess it's coming up next year. But here you can begin to see the structure, and the columns, and everything begins to come together as a canvas. And then this diagram just showing the kind of density and velocity that comes through the canopy and the deck itself. So everything's recharged, all geothermal, works off of its own well water, so nothing leaves the site. That is with the rain as it comes through. And the interior, like I say, is much more polished. This is white oak, really white oak that's been water popped and ebonized, so it'll remain, have a luster to it as this wrapper begins to weather and gray. And one of the strange things that's begun to happen is there's an interstitial space between the box and the wrapper that we thought was very important, especially for cleaning glass and that sort of thing. People are now, it's happened twice already, so I don't know if it's a pattern, it only happened twice, but are getting engaged. And it's not literally, but I mean like to be married. So it's a strange thing. They're expecting weddings here next year, yes, I don't know. But it's just this sliver of space that attracts me. Images and some party shots. So, again, these I consider more forest structures. They're really more about the canopy than walls or floors or that sort of thing. Carries over to a project that we just recently completed, a proposal for falling water. We were shortlisted with 5 other firms to propose 6 cottages for falling water, which they would start building 1 a year over the next 6 years. They had to all come in at about $200,000 a piece. It was a wonderful opportunity. We were flown up to Falling Water and they met us here. the snow gave us snowshoes and sent us on our way to explore the site. Of course, it's more challenging to think about adding something to this place, but the beauty of it was the site was much higher in a meadow. It's a 5,000 acre conservancy. It's part of all the water. This is that meadow, full of switchgrass. There's trails that go through it that lead to a farmhouse here in the foreground, where they take communal meals and educational programs are presented. And so we were allowed to build at the edge of the field, or the field, whichever we wish, but this was our site, this beautiful sloping pasture to the views of the Alleghenies. So walking around in the snow, we felt that the most obvious thing to do was to sprinkle things along the edge of the woods at that sort of transition, that echo tone between the woods and the pasture. But our idea was to take that ridge and really start to articulate it. And we drew our diagram that, there's a saying, if you don't have an idea within 2 hours of being on a site, you're not going to have one. So we didn't have any paper, we just started drawing in snow. So that was our diagram. And so the idea was to develop a community of buildings rather than single buildings that can be built incrementally, so you create a kind of social fabric across the field, and then of course we just articulate a place. There's the farmhouse here, and falling water is down here at the base of the mountain. So this is the communal fire pit, and then the row of slightly embedded cottages, and then that would be like moving across the field from the Kirkpatrick House at night. That is a series of lanterns that punctuate the hillside. The switchgrass just rolls right up on top, and then you move down the hill. All of the south elevations are made out of cordwood, so cordwood is collected on the site of 5,000 acres and stacked in a kind of steel frame that makes, and there's glass behind that in certain areas so it can be illuminating from behind. And these really act in their own ways as extended thresholds from the site into this, enclave, let's say, of private spaces. And to build a big model, I had one guy cut little twigs for 3 days to do that. We used fir to make the grass. I know this is a real spirit of inventive model making in the school side. Fir is good. If you clip it right, you can't just take it right out of the box. So an idea of how the section works through the house. Cascade down the house, bedrooms at one level, loft at another, and then the living area, and then a porch that is nearly the footprint of the building, supported by one column, and then a fire pit here on the porch. It's going to work with it in this sort of thresholds you come in through the skylit stairway, sort of steady fireplace, in one. Everything is on a geothermal system, so that all mechanical room is in one building. So each time you add a cottage, you don't add another mechanical, it's on a loop. And the breezes come up the hill, and it's all channeled back out the doorways. So again, the proximity in our mind is to create a place for fellowship, for exchanging ideas, for just kind of hanging out, but at the same time, you could retreat back into your cottage and have this really spectacular set of relationships. Again, the canopy becomes, in a lot of ways, the driver here for it. We didn't win the competition. Very disappointed. The firm that did win had a strange underground scheme. I don't know what that's about. It looked like Hobbit land. The family that owned the property was so offended by it and felt that it offended Reich's legacy, they actually refused to allow it to be built on the site. So they're moving into another part of the conservancy. I wish them luck. It's truly bad. I don't want to mention the firm because they're actually quite good. Every once in a while you don't get it right. So kind of transitioning out of the canopy into, the ideas of building to material logics that act as sleeves and shells and carapaces and things like that. This is our first largest project to date, really. It's completed. It's a private golf clubhouse for John Tyson, CEO of Tyson Foods. He basically told us he didn't want another tariff, he didn't want another hunting lodge. He wanted something that would respect the ritual and traditions of golf, but actually speak more to its place in a contemporary way. He kind of left it as that, and he wanted 1,000-year materials or 150-year materials on stone and copper. So that's about the best we can want. And on top of that, he didn't want to spend crazy money. So we had to do this for $210 a square foot. Just for the building, that's not the FF&E of the site, but that's $100 less a square foot than the average golf clubhouse in the country. Our first response, my first response, I don't golf, I don't really care about golf at all. I told him that, I said, I just don't know anything about golf. And he sort of leaned in my face and said, hey man, it's not about golf, it's about people and space. So I can do that. And you do clients like that, you gotta perk up. So, straight site, we're in a valley. This Robert Trent Jones Jr. golf course has already been designed. You're in a triangular piece of property that about half of it, you can see the dotted line here, is in an Indian, Osage Indian archaeological zone. So it's a preservation site, not an excavation site, so it had been treated with 3 feet of engineering field that you couldn't penetrate. Our original idea was to minimize the footprint of a 26,000 square foot building by using this hill as a support and span over into the site on top of an artificial hill filled with golf carts. So you have a 6,000 square foot footprint, but a 26,000 square foot. Didn't work because that hill is solid rock, so we still kept the spanning, bridging idea here, this entry portal, and then moved all the golf carts to basically the behind a stone wall. This is the University of Arkansas's men and women's golf practice facility, which was the first building I wanted to show you that they established the palette, both formal and material, that allowed us to start articulating the golf clubhouse. Our team is rated #1 in the country right now. I gotta believe recruiting has something to do with it. So, what is it? Just a simple box. Again, when you're doing things for very little money, we love the box, and we love the expressive character of the box, which allows us, if we're really smart with form, to detail the lines out of it, to get the level of craft and detail that really enriches our direct experience with spaces and surfaces. So, locally quarried stone with iron deposits in the stone that works quite well with copper, which will never turn green because we have very clean air out in Arkansas. It's the most part. The portal, which acts as another threshold into the golf facility or the golf course, frames the 18th hole. So you actually start where you end on the course, and then you end where you begin on the course. So golf pro shop on your left, lobby and harbor on your right. From the golf course side of the elevation. Again, a bit more sculptural on the golf course side, dining area, men's grill, and then the space here. Once you go inside, we'll take the stone of the portal that's wrapped in stone, extend that into the lobby and up to make the grand stair. You're down in the archaeological zone, there's no view, there's only indirect light. Local hardwoods, in this case, Peter split match cherry plywood, as well as walnut. These are the palette materials, and our favorite material, drywall. So a lot more drywall we normally like in a club like this, but we try to take a more Losian approach to it, which is bringing the detail and the richness down to eye level and letting the rest of it go. Being very strategic about that. Harbor and the dining area, which looks out to a local Zen garden. We actually found a Zen Meister in Ohio, brought him out to Arkansas. He took local sand and rocks and things. Moving up the stairs, stone and wood monumental stair leading from above, comes into a gallery that acts as a transition between into, let's say, the men's grill, which is the primary social space, places for solitude as well as hanging out. Here, this media wall that folds into a kind of cloud ceiling for the open locker area. Side fireplace and bar are the three elements that articulate this particular space. Then it transitions into the locker area, all custom-made lockers, and then all the wet areas done in a kind of handcrafted glazed and matte tile that terminates in a whirlpool, which is skylit from above. When we unveiled the models and drawings for this project to the club members, he lost 3 club members on the spot who were just horrified by it. Others were very quiet. And it wasn't until this thing started coming into shape, started seeing materials, seeing things come together, you get stopped at a basketball game or on the street and said, hey, I'm really liking what I'm seeing. And now, because what I got to tell you is there's a golf community that comes with us. It's all in that kind of mansion stuff. The folks, they live in their houses, but they don't live here. I think what we try to do is overcome stereotypes that are associated with, kind of more contemporary language, and really work towards warmth and comfort and natural materials. All those things that sound like cliches but really have effects on people. And I think for us that's the greatest success. So following this project, we had the opportunity to do our own house. And I always told my roommate at Auburn that I would never own a house that I didn't design and build myself. What I didn't know is that I would be 50 years old before that happened. So I don't recommend it to the students as a business plan. You don't get a lot of equity built up that way. So I rented literally for 25 years until I got ready to build our house. And of course, as any good architect will do, we found a lot that nobody wanted in town, right near downtown in the university. It's a trapezoidal lot, 9,000 square foot lot with a creek that runs diagonally through it. Took us a year and a half. We moved next door to a house, of course, and just observed the creek, kind of figure out how to situate, to develop a diagram that would preserve the maximum amount of space to enhance the creek and its occupied site in a contextual way with our neighbors, which is all live in one-story wood frame houses. And so what we developed was an operation of bridging and stacking. The first floor spans 42 feet over the creek, and we rotated the second 18-foot wide box volume back into the site 90 degrees. We rotated it, what we like to call the L-stack house. And what this does is it preserves almost all of the site that we need, as well as provide us outdoor space underneath this covered outdoor space, I would say, underneath this second volume for our outdoor kitchen and terrace, and then another deck to the north here that's lined with bamboo. You can see the streetscape, some of you can, down below, and how it contextualizes with the neighbors. We didn't get stoned or tagged or anything while we're building it, which is good. I think most of it's because my wife, who is also my partner, we collaborated on this. She taught me into making it out of wood rather than corten or copper, which is what I'm going to do. It's already different, she said, so let's just keep it simple. The thing that kind of ties these two volumes together is a glass enclosed stair that's aligned with the screen, acts as a kind of hinge. Perceptually, you go outside, you go back inside. essence of it aligned with the creek. It's a great place to sit and watch the stream rise and so on. And one of the things that our firm really believes in is that every detail is a spatial proposition. So every element then is a spatial proposition. So things like windows and doors, simple joints can all be places in which you can literally inhabit or perceptually inhabit. They're extensions of the room. So you see that with this day bed that's cantilevered out over the creek. Again, the residue of the porch is there, the presence of that typology is part of what we do along with the other porches in the neighborhood. The key to all of this, though, is not conceptually talking about stacking, but it's literally how do you move from a conceptual idea to a perceptual idea. So every detail was derived from that moment right there. If you don't get that right, then you're doing a Lincoln log or something. You got to figure it out, right? So at no margin of error, 3/4 inch space, it's got to be an x-axis, is what we call it, an x-axis. So individual floor, individual ceiling, all the detailing starts right there. And so perception aligns with conception, and for me that's a desirable goal. Pro bank and rain screen, house is wrapped in rubber, rain screen is disengaged from that to hide the gutters and downspouts. Then you take the Brazilian redwood and you toe-nail it from below, stainless steel screws into these vertical struts. Then I paid a guy and his crew to paint 13,000 screws black. So he asked me to lose his phone number afterwards. But it came out quite nice. Very labor intensive. We use angle iron around the windows to do the counter flash, wrap the rubber over that. Really simple, dumb techniques. Inside is very straightforward. All golden proportions, really work in proportion once we got the basic gesture down. My wife's David, she's the queen of lounge. She won that battle, and it's really a great enhancement. And then upstairs are very functional spaces, but we really like to use the hallway in multiple sort of ways. So we created these bay windows that the kids can watch TV or have places to study, so they're not just trapped in their rooms, but when they're in the rooms, there's places for activities such as reading or studying. My son has finally gotten over the psychological scarring of having to change his pajamas in front of the glass window. We now have a button you can push the shades up there. Hopefully he won't do too much damage. So what I've gone through, whether you may or may not, is a series of projects that are driven by analogs of nature or by the forces of nature to allow it to print itself in some way, to allow it to feel excited, configured. Amazon.com, that's my commercial break. Now, the second half of this, which is much shorter than the first half, so I want to show you, though, another take on the work where it deals less with nature made and more with culture made. After the Second World War, many of you may have heard of Senator Fulbright, who made the Fulbright Scholarship. He's from Fayetteville, Arkansas. His family mill makes farm instruments, plows, wagon wheels, that sort of thing. And there's less and less a need for these types of instruments. And so the other famous architect who's, besides J. Jones, who's from Fayetteville, is Edward Durrell Stone. And Edward Durrell Stone is making the first fine arts complex in the country at the University of Arkansas in 1951. And he and Fulbright get together and he comes up with an idea of how to repurpose these plowshares, these wagon wheels, by turning them into a line of contemporary furniture. If you can get these today, good luck. They're worth tens and $20,000 of dollars. But they're pretty amazing. But I think it's a very interesting idea about repurposing and making this beautiful thing out of something was becoming devalued and outmoded. And I see that in some ways as an analog to our cities and to the fabrics that we often come in contact with that are secondhand, that we are waiting, I guess, to be repurposed in some way. So all of the structures I'm going to show you from here on out have been repurposed in some ways, and then the ways in which that can be done. And at the same time, bringing forward the craft of a place. In this case, the basket weaving and making that's so prevalent in my part of our design, those things. So the first project takes place in Gentry, Arkansas. It's a small town of 2,500 people. The only thing they've got going on in town is a little Debbie snack food plant and a wild country safari where you drive through the landscape and monkeys jump on your roof. That's it. Very poor. They have a public library that was privately funded. Very little money. But they had a dream, the library board had a dream of having their own library, their own community room, and a place to exhibit artifacts from the city's history. They came in contact with one of the city sons, a family that had owned a hardware store for 100 years on the corner of Main Street, and he let them have it for a song. And this building could have been one of the most awful buildings I've ever seen, because it's in Tornado Alley. And the building, even at the turn of the century, was quite modest. It's a mercantile, type building with brick and a little portland and a little bit of ornament. But very simple. Well, it had been hit by multiple storms over the past 100 years, and the brick and parapet that had been blown off were just patched back together with whatever they could find. The brick actually came up from St. Louis, and they didn't have the money, so they just patched it. And so the ticks and wrinkles accrued over that time really was the expression of the building. The busted out windows, the boarded up storefronts. And I wanted to tear it down. The library, head of the library board said, well, that wouldn't work because people are very sentimental about this building. And we don't want a historical prestige, but at the same time, we want the past providing with the future here, a new identity. And he said, I grew up eating barbecue beaver out of the first floor on the old wood stove. There were buggies that were sold off the second floor and hooked up to horses on the first floor. All of these things. So our challenge was how to represent this building design. So we began to think of the building less and less as something negative and more as a kind of valuable artifact from the past, and how we could reframe that artifact through a series of details as a way of making a new syntax for the building. And so this first detail is called soap bubble. It's just a glass vitrine that slips over the blown out window. So rather than replacing the windows, this becomes a type of vitrine and where you can begin to take artifacts and turn them out to the street, books and turn it out to the street. So you start taking this institution's building and turning it inside out. A series of models, we had to present it to the town in the city hall. They voted for the design, and then they wound up passing a millage in the town of 2,500 people for $1 million. And then the McKee family, who owns Little Debbie Snack Foods, gave $250,000. Still not enough money, but it was a way to start. We had to build this. This is the cheapest library built in the last 20 years or so, maybe less. In Arkansas, it built for $108 a square foot. And it had to be rebid 3 times. It's a 7-year process. But this is it today. And so a series of glass windows and columns and storefronts, moving all the columns in the storefront. These are a series of 2-inch by 18-inch steel fins that act as structure, redundant structure that moves across. The lateral bracing is a shelf, an angled shelf for new books and journals that can be interfaced with the street on the north side here. A series of light-catching windows that can display artifacts, but also bring in north light, ground north light. This is a tough town. This is the mayor. He's got he owns a tattoo parlor, and he's tougher than a pine. And I've got to say, Without him, this wouldn't have happened. He fought off the small town politics, all the negativity that for some reason came along with having a first-class library. And we fought for 4 years with certain people in town, the newspaper, all of this, that somehow saw this as an invasion because we were foreigners 45 minutes away. So this is what it looked like. Very simple plan, and taking that to crochet here, pulling in to make the shelves for the books, the community room here, and an undeveloped piece of property here, which became a Little Debbie Pocket Park, and then we have a little plaza, and then a future home of their exhibit hall for their volunteer firefighting equipment and fire truck. Upstairs, the librarian's room and all the genealogy and artifacts are primarily exhibited upstairs, genealogy department. Pocket Park, just right after construction, it's all filled with vines and everything now. Diagram that shows the different kit of parts, the different elements that were used to develop kind of new identity and language, including this 16-foot high beacon that was placed over the existing light well. And a very kind of taut detail and shrink wrap almost the building to create this very transparent interface between the library and the street. On the interior, we had to preserve the press tin ceiling, so it was all taken down by county prisoners and then numbered and then restored. They didn't want to punctuate that in any way, so there was no lighting or mechanical dust that could be diffusers to go through it, so we did everything from the walls and then put it all back in its place. And the way we lighted the area around the reading area is Mesian-like columns that we had to use to replace these columns. And then we wrap it in glass, we bounce the light up off the ceiling, and it creates the light. And of course, books form the base. Homemade furniture from local hardwoods. Arkansas's first mechanical lift, which was preserved as an exhibit space. And again, thinking about how you develop this sort of secular relationship. Again, spiritual but not religious, bringing in the spiritual, in some ways, prosaic, just by simply lighting it in a careful way. The success story here really, for me, isn't so much the architecture, but it's what it does for the city. They started with 300 library card holders when they started 7 years ago. They now have 2,300 library card holders in a town of 25. So that for us is what we feel is the greatest achievement we're able to do with this. We're currently undershooting a couple projects that are under construction and working on. We're teamed up with 2 other firms on a $90 million, 500,000 square foot high school in Fayetteville. We're having to reuse some of these existing buildings, which are some of the ugliest buildings I've seen in a long time. We're reskinning, tearing apart, camouflaging, building new buildings so that it all becomes a more unified campus on a hill that drops 85 feet to the Martin Luther King Boulevard, a major street in Fayetteville. This will be the finished product. This is the new athletic facilities, the new performing arts, and then a 600-foot long bar building, small learning communities, classrooms. It has an interior 100-foot wide, 600-foot long street that you can close off. Creates a very secure condition for the kids. It's all made out of the same boxwood metal with local stone that we used on the golf clubhouse. We're having to do this for $167 a square foot. This is the basic layout. It has a kind of central axis that goes up through a series of courtyards that you can move through as you go up to the athletic facilities on top of the hill. All of this can be secured off. So they had 74 ways of getting into the school. So they're concerned about, they now have 4 that they can control. Moving through the main plaza, internal street. library that spans over media center, which acts as the nerve center for the whole complex. This is a sectional cut through the hill, shows you how the buildings stack up. And how it makes its way down the hill. And then the fly loft kind of swoops up to make a shark fin for the kind of marquee for the new Performing Arts Center, which is going to be shared by the university and the community and the school. So very simple industrial blocks of metal, but natural stone that's been cut very thinly. So it's not your cultured licking stick, but it's a natural licking stick. And the metal shifts in front of it, so you don't get the saddlebag and you only get the stone. And here's some construction shots underway. Metal going on. And this metal will show up again in the next project. Well, not the next one, the last project. But again, you can see progeny and progenitors all working together there. I think the biggest project that we're doing today is the new architecture school for the University of Arkansas. It's a 100,000 square foot project. We teamed up with another firm with a design lead on this. The dean and the chancellor pulled some fast ones to allow the department head to be the architect. And we moved so quickly that faculty didn't have time to respond, which was good, nor the students. So we weren't interested in their initial reactions or their formal complaints. But because we were under a timeline, it was tough to get the money. I don't want to bore you with the whole story, but we got the money. Very fortunate. And I have great familiarity with this building in 20 years. It's the old library right on the central axis of campus. This building was built back in the 30s. Here it is right here with that wing we were just looking at. This is Old Main I was showing you earlier. So the central axis has a series of big little buildings that goes through a quarter to a half mile all the way to the football stadium. The problem with this is that because this is a library, the book stacks were here. You could only move through the axes, then go around, and then go back through the axes. So our strategy is to blow out the core of the building and open up that axis and reconfigure it with a series of stacked studios and redefine spaces, and then connect another bar the same width and length of this classical bar, but in a much different language, but materially sympathetic. So there's the redefined axes through, which only puts it 52 feet from the ugliest building on campus, which is the Alpha Sphere, comes to Arkansas Library. So we had to come up with ways in which our students weren't confronted with that every day. Because the only real source of studio light is from the west, this being the west elevation. So 200 foot long west elevation and 10. Again, diagram very quickly that shows the kind of coring out of the middle, and then developing a new plug and this new bar. So we move from a T-shape scheme to an I or an H. So maintaining that figural condition on the center campus. This is the new building. It also uses Indiana limestone like the old one, except that it's a rain screen instead, and then architectural concrete, working with Peter Clarkson, who is the consultant at Bondo and Pulitzer, and then our concrete people are actually from San Diego, work on the expansion of the saw. They have really good concrete going in. And dealing with this issue of the sun and the west elevation, we looked at a variety of configurations for the brise-soleil. This is a fritted glass brise-soleil that's disengaged from this custom steel and glass curtain wall system. And finally came to the conclusion our best option was to orient them to the north, get views out for the studio, but deflect the view due west. Not only deflect the view, deflect the light due west. The view of the library. section cut through the building. The building's been developed obliquely because it's so close to the library, setting up a kind of formal approach, like its twin on the other side, not its fraternal twin, let's say, wasn't possible. So we're looking how we deal with this obliquely. The plinth slides out, allow more studio space to keep the scale down with the old building. Covered outdoor classroom, conferences, studios, 200-seat auditorium here, and an exhibit gallery that allows us for the first time as a school to interface with the rest of the campus along that axis has been opened up. So all landscape, interior design, architecture will be under the same roof for the first time in 50 years. And then a view from the northwest, shade loss here. And I use this diagram to talk to the design review board to try to explain what we were doing, because there were, obviously a little disconsultation about the look of the building. Basically, we said we wanted the building to be more didactic. The whole complex, everything from the varieties of concrete we have to form making, materials, space making, for students to understand a broad range of how architecture becomes manifest. So looking at the front elevation here, where the building is essentially, the mass of the building is the ground, and the figural expressive parts are in the windows. So what we explained to them is we're just reversing that. So through profile, we develop figure, and the fenestration then becomes essentially the ground. And so that inversion sets up just another way of looking at how we develop systems of articulation and form. Sectionally, preserving much of the original detailing, the large reading room, the grand stairway, and then the large gallery where all the reviews take place and major reviews. We've added studios on top of an oculus that's encased in red, level 5 finish glass with an 8-foot by 20-foot piece of glass in Germany. Immersed the blue sky with red. So the reading room, we configured with new desks, and reoccupied, new lighting, pretty much in the same condition but restored. Looking at the large gallery here, what we did is remove the ceiling of the large gallery, all molding, and put in a new mat, which is a fabric ceiling, which lights up like a lampshade, 2,500 square feet. Installs the lighting column and the acoustic, it's slightly perforated. Looks like plastic when the lights are off, but illuminates evenly across the ceiling when they're on. So the existing condition here, and then the red shell and the oculus blue sky. And we made one incision in all the detailing here, the steel encased cut, glass vitrine, and this allows us to pull all the display panels out of the room, store them, and this acts as an event space for the auditorium, which is just on the other side. Under construction now, it's all carved up. This is the first integrated project delivery for the university. It's all Revit, BIM model, very helpful in the development of the project. See the auditorium. It's not very good on that, but it's all red thin ply and felt as the walls. And the covered outdoor space here, multi-purpose space, looks out over the Boston Mountains beyond campus. So we're due for finishing. July 2013, and quite excited because, like I said, it's the first time that the school actually will be a school. And just, here's the status of where it was digging holes. Well, appreciate your patience. The last project I'm going to share with you. I think I took Bob by here when it was. The outside was done, the inside wasn't, so we'll get a chance to see that now. Most of our projects do come with cows in some form, or cattle or livestock, something. This is a project that's located right along the interstate in Springdale, Arkansas, amongst a series of churches. This is for a congregation of Orthodox Christian folks that they were meeting. I can show you that in a minute, but they had no money originally, but somebody died in the church and left them $450,000 in cash. And so they used $300,000 to buy this property next to a city park, and this house, this blue house. Here's the city park. Here's the house. There's an old metal warehouse right here. And these are all, in red, are all the churches that are surrounded by. And when they came to us, this is what they had in mind here. To the church, $100 a square foot, not going to do it. Can't do it, won't do it. So what we showed them, though, were examples of adventures in religious architecture around the area. These metal buildings, crosses on them and stuff. And, you know, our point in showing this was that when people go to church at these places, we find it interesting that a lot of their vehicles cost more than the building. And we don't think people actually live in buildings like this. So our question was, why would you worship in such a place? And I brought up a Southern Baptist. I know the whole shtick that, you know, you can worship anywhere. But I also see it as a kind of a house of worship as a kind of gift. So here's a congregation that has an aestheticized way of worshiping. And, you know, we just wanted to point out this isn't the direction you really want to go. I mean, just down the interstate, there's a Oasis Church, you know, this Baptist Fellowship Church, but 150 feet away is, you know, Arkansas's Ultimate Gentleman's Club. And they're both built by the same metal building manufacturer. So, you know, we pointed out these contradictions. So they didn't want to go that way, but again, they only had $100 a square foot. This is where they were worshiping in a rundown office building on the street in Springdale. Really kind of pitiful. So, you know, what could they do? Well, this is what they had to start with. So a long introduction, and to set this up, this is what we started with, a metal building. And our heart sunk, because we thought, well, they're going to tear it down and build a church, and no, we can't afford to tear it down. So what we had to do is think very carefully and strategize about how to transform this building, but still allow it to remain intact, so that it could become something else. And this constraint then became a way of liberating not so much us, but the church, into thinking about how it might be otherwise. So using classical Greek proportioning, which was our way into the dialogue with it, we were able to come at this in a different way, using the icons that are so important to their rituals and the way in which they worship as a way to animate and articulate the exterior as well as the interior. So this was achieved in effect by wrapping the existing building with this metal panel that you saw in the school and adding 10 feet to the front of the metal building. So it now has a double skin, the American double skin, not the European. But adding this 10 feet allows us to fold the narthex north-south so that we can get back onto an east-west alignment, which is very important for the sanctuary. The other room you see here is the fellowship hall. And there's two walls that are on wheels that open up, allow for overflow during Christmas and Easter services, or just direct connection to an event in the fellowship hall. Like I said, this is from the city park side, which we're going to redevelop. Very kind of prosaic, simple blocks. And then as we turn the corner, something much more sacred in its composition and content. A simple plan. Worship in the Orthodox Christian, people stand, people sit, so we have chairs if they need it, and pews along the edge for older folk. There's a baptistry here that they couldn't afford, so the choir sits in there now. And then there's a niche right here that you'll see St. Nicholas, and then the candles up here and the service. So part of this too was to engage folks in the interstate. So as they drive by, they're competing with all these mega churches for an audience. And then the color, which is the blood of Christ, a very important thing, and that's washed in the light of the steeple with red glass. That creates some wonderful color effects with the blue glass and the yellow glass. So the narthex candles and tray with sand fired into the return air duct, which is actually white oak. Moving down the narthex into the sanctuary. Just some of the effects, light coming through. Scene. John, service here. Light rises in the east and creates kind of a nice halo effect around the altar. Iconostasis and steel angles. This church, I was telling Bob earlier, has now become wall-to-wall and floor-to-ceiling icons everywhere. It's amazing. It's the first time I've had a client who's actually altered the interior I really love. It's just fantastic icons everywhere you turn. So it becomes a kind of exuberant articulation of contrast with the restraint of the exterior, opening up the walls of the fellowship. Now, one of the key things was a dome. As you saw in the first few slides, the dome was what they wanted. They had to have it. We couldn't afford it. We talked them into embedding it into the crochet of the existing building, the ceiling between that tube, the roof, and the new ceiling. But a new dome was going to cost way more than we could afford. And this is it here. So the way in which we were able to get them a dome is our contractor came up with a really great idea that in 2 cases of beer, he could trade it for a satellite dish. So it gives you a kind of slow pilgrimage, to the church. From the church, and we skimmed it. It's already got a lath built into it, right? And we just skim coated it. I told Father John, I said, "Hey man, now you got a direct connection to God." He said, "Yeah, it's pointing in the wrong direction." So that's true. But anyway, it was really great. I've got a few seconds. I'll tell you this. But they got so into this that one of the building committee guys said, "Hey, I know where we can get a bishop's chair. We need a chair for the bishop when he comes. It's wood. It's purple crushed velvet, and I can get it for free." And I said, "Oh, really? Where?" He goes, "Well, it's at the local liquor store as part of an ad campaign." And he said, "I just don't know what we're going to do with the embroidered CR on it." I said, "CR?" And he goes, "Yeah, Crown Royal." Oh, I said, "Well, how about Christ the Redeemer?" Yeah, great idea. really got in the spirit. So they have their dome now with a pantry crater, and kind of completes everything. Well, look, last thing I want to say is, I was traveling through the Delta, not that far from where I live, back in about 3 or 4 years ago, coming back from vacation. We were driving through the Delta, going to go through Memphis and then back up through Fayetteville. It was August 16th, and I was flipping through my traveling blues guidebook, and I discovered that August 16th is the day that Elvis Presley died. It's the anniversary of his death. And I thought, God, the last place I want to be is in Memphis, because all the Elvis wacko fanatic things come out. But we got to avoid that. We're going to go straight through the Delta from Hellenmark. So Well, unbeknownst to me, as I was looking through the book, that somebody else had died in August 62, which was Robert Johnson, who many consider the godfather of the blues. And he was actually buried in two places, in Quito, Mississippi. Two churches claim him, so he has two gravestones. Anyways, if you know the kind of legend of Robert Johnson, he was poisoned by a jealous husband at a juke joint near the crossroads, and he lingered for a few days and he passed on. And anyways, we went to the first site, the people had already been there, and they were harmonicas and guitar picks, and you can't see in the shadow, there's a bottle slide with a $20 bill in there. But what I noticed was a stick that had been driven in the ground, this forked stick, and it said, "Ask for the right directions." And I thought about that for a second, and I don't know what was popping in my head, but you know, as an architect, you know, I always try to develop everything back in some ways towards architecture. And I started thinking about its application to what we do, and it seemed to me that, you know, really what we need to worry less about is getting the right answers and more about posing the right questions. And these are questions I think that we have to ask of our place, of our patrons, of our institutions, of each other, and I think ultimately ourselves. And I think it's the questions that are posed in the process of moving from conceptualization to realization that really helps us understand the significance of our place and the emerging thought of our time. And what hopefully I've been able to do tonight is demonstrate that architecture can happen anywhere, at any scale, at any budget, and that there is humor, H-U-M-O-R, and inspiration and dignity in our place, in the everyday. I think Heidegger said it best when he said, "We don't want to get anywhere, we just want to get to where we already are." Thank you very much. I'm happy to stay another 2 hours if somebody asks me. Can't leave without it. Don't make me call on people. Stunned into silence. That's a first.
All right, you really like the stair, like on the side of the stair, because it shows up whether it's in the church ceiling or your house or the Biloxi house or the high school. Like that's the one kind of formal fetish object that finds a way into every project, regardless of budget or time or site. So,
What's that about?
yeah, what's that about for you?
Yeah, well, you know, Fresh Meat asked me that earlier. Interesting. The way I explained it to them is you're talking what I like to call the foot. And the foot, you'd love to think of it was like Dolly's crush, right? But it's not that way. It's really about, very interested, for me, expressive character comes in many ways by how we situate ourselves relative to the ground. Whether it's an animate object or an inanimate condition, right? So I'm just very interested in that. And then if in the diagram you can find alignment with a program, again, the box is about all we have to deal with. As you can see, there's nothing parametric up here. Although I found somebody doing a parametric studio that showed the pavilion in Indianapolis. I had to tell them, you know, please take it down off the wall. So that is that moment, that eccentricity, right, that makes the connection to the ground, which connects it, but also calls upon its disconnection, right? So that's where all that kind of comes from. I figure if you can get the gesture, the situation of a building relative to its ground right, then it's probably working pretty good against the sky too. That's just my own bias. So that's where that comes from. And it's just it's a form of bias. But it only shows up if there's a programmatic alignment. If I can't get the program and the diagram to work together, I need to back to these. Yes?
Would you ever consider doing a utopian project? Utopian project?
What do you mean by that? Like a utopian neighborhood, or?
Well, I guess it depends what utopia would mean to you as architect.
No, I don't go for utopias. I mean, I'm just not ideological. I like you know, my idea is architecture doesn't happen very often, and when it does, it's usually controversial. And that's my take on it. I think I'm happy that architecture doesn't happen very often. It's a lot of work, and it's unreal to think that everybody would want to do that. But I think that's why I have an aversion to, certain utopias. I don't know that they work. So, yeah, no, I would be interested. But others might. I like going to utopias. Like, I went to Seaside for vacation. It's nice for a visit. But I wouldn't want to make it or plan it. No, we're going to have 3 because it's all this church stuff. And we have to have 3 questions. Please. Yes, sir.
Can I ask about the ribbon window that across the corner for the golf club?
The ribbon window across the
That
corner?
across the corner,
Which one is that?
the golf club.
Okay. Which, I'm trying to think of which one, the wraps. Hold on, pardon me. I can, it'd be easier to talk. Whoa. Things are not fast. Let me do it this way. It's kind of mimetic experience. I guess it's further back than I thought. But I want to make sure I don't get confused. It's kind of complicated. I've never done this backwards.
Right, this image.
Is that?
This image.
Yeah. What's that about?
The ribbon window that across the corner.
Yeah. What's that about?
I mean, I'll pick up on that. Like, in a way, it's not a box, it's a tube. And
It's a tube.
Your inset from this end is intentional in a way that it gives it direction. And then you intentionally break that.
I did it on the house too. I think it started with the honey house, where if you notice the box, the wall is not capped on the end. For me, it's just a way of dissolving it at the end, so it sort of emerges in its own way. There's a kind of breakdown of the system. I don't have time to run all the way back, but if you look at the honey house the same way, what I did there is fold the glass around so you make a volume. So it's a way of shifting from an idea about surface to volume, I guess, and that's where it comes from. And I still look at this and I can't figure out, I remember how we did the cantilever, but I can't ever find it when I go there. So it makes me worried at some level. Not sure how it came about. It's a cool space. But yeah, that's the idea, actually, is to you set up the material logic, the formal logic, but then by breaking it, it creates a kind of third thing. But it's really tertiary, but it's really about shifting from surface to volume. I think that's what it is.
Is the ability of the project so it has mass function, arch shell, the stair, small footprint of the stair is one aspect of that. What about something with a skylight or this kind of swoop?
Yeah, the skylight. Yeah. It's just the way it's our way of working against the constraints that we have to develop expression out of the box. So rather than punching the box silly, sometimes we just create an anomaly, we create some eccentricity out of that, and then it's programmatic, so it has use, and that's why it never gets cut. Every time you know, you do things like that, and they become extraneous sometimes, and then they get value engineered. But because they're useful and they're embedded as DNA of the project, they're always there at the end. So it's one aspect. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you.